Hi, I'm Andrew Jeffs. I'm a partner at Cavendish looking after our business services practice. I'm joined today by Keith White. Keith White is the founder and chairman of CRM Students. And I had the pleasure of working with Keith a little over a year and a half ago now on the sale of his business. So Keith, very kind of you to join us this afternoon.
My pleasure.
I wanted to kick off. Could you tell us a little bit about CRM and the service it provides?
Sure. CRM is a specialist provider of student management, asset management and advisory work for the large-scale purpose-built student accommodation, which has emerged over the last sort of 10, 15 plus years in the UK. With the mad and increasing number of young people going to university, there's this big issue about accommodation, which gave CRM an opportunity to step into that space. So we manage them, we help design them, we operate them, we run all the financial management and help clients when they look to exit those buildings as well.
And there's lots of stories around at the moment about what will happen at the start of the next academic year. Are some students going to look to defer their places because of COVID-19? As a business, how are you planning for what will happen after the summer?
We've cash flowed our business to look at the worst case scenario. So if there's a big fall off in international students and a reduction in UK students, just so we can make sure that the business still functions from a performance perspective and we have enough cash in the bank. So we're pretty chilled about that. Mm-hmm. It's an interesting one about whether students will come or not. I have done a lot of work and there's a lot of comment in the marketplace about what that might mean. The emerging view from UCAS and from the Higher Educational Policy Institute, amongst others, is that actually the UK student numbers that will be very robust, very little reduction is the expectation. The reason for that, particularly when first years coming back, is that they've just had 3 months of what's it like to learn online and found quite a very disappointing experience. And also a lot of them just want to leave home and just get on with life. The equally as well, then they're quite rational students, but I know people have this view about, oh, they're students, but they're a very rational bunch and mostly have common sense, but we all have a little bit of a weakness on that when we're younger. And they recognize that what are the alternatives in a recession? And we saw that in 2008 with the GFC. There are no hospitality jobs. There are no sort of simple jobs. Traveling is going to be increasingly difficult over the next 12 months because of lockdowns and restrictions in travel, et cetera, et cetera. So do I sit at home on the sofa and watch Netflix for the next 12 months and play on my Sony, or do I actually do something with my life and get to meet some people and enjoy myself? There is also another sort of spin to that as well, which is there's this perception that all lectures are online. Well, they may be for the first term, then we'll wait and see. But equally as well, university is not just about lectures, it's about seminars, it's about group work, it's about presentations and all of those kind of things. So there is still an awful lot of interaction and the student body know this. So our expectation is there'll be little, if any, impact on UK students. When you talk about internationals, then that's a little bit more of an unknown. Again, I've been talking to a group called UHomes, which is a major agency in bringing Chinese students in particular into the UK market. And their expectation is about 80 to 85% of those students who would have come will come still. There will be a fall off. There's undoubtedly a slowdown in bookings at the moment compared to year on year. But we put that down to people's just nervousness and concern about when do I book, what do I book? I don't need to rush. The good old days of you had to book your student accommodation in December or you're homeless in July or August the following year have long gone. Therefore, that perception of shortage of accommodation. So we're quietly optimistic. We think there will be some challenges in some locations, but at a macro level, we think it will work its way through.
You know, when you look back, the moments of opportunity and challenge that got the business to where it was when you came to exit in 2018?
I have reflected on that in the 18 months since I sort of no longer own it, but I'm still involved in the business as non-exec chairman. And it was it's a scary sort of journey that we went on. I bought the business from Savills with a couple of other investors with 23 staff, and I sold it with over 400. And cash flow, as ever, was the sort of the main challenge in the first few years. We were lucky in some respects and had some vision in the other way. Part of the benefit we had in the early days was when we were part of Savills, we did some in management of large residential blocks, and then we started to look at student because we saw a correlation in the fundamental service of it's a building, somebody wants to live in it, you have to find the tenant, collect the rent, maintain the building. So there was a lot of similarity in that space. You just have to overlay the peculiarities of the student market. I mean, for example, we didn't have a website when I first bought the business, and didn't for the first couple of years because there was a massive migration of people going into the university world. So you didn't need to really market the building. You just have to be there, throw a few leaflets out, talk to the university, and open the door and they will come. Those days obviously are long gone. But the name student was a great benefit for the business because we were the first mover into this market. And for 3 or 4 years, there was really no competition because everybody who was running residential management didn't want to deal with students because they perceived them as problems, challenges. And because most people have been to university, even 10 or 15 years ago, in the sense of people running businesses, they saw themselves and thought, no, I don't want to get anywhere near at all. Because they had that history of what they were like and sort of didn't see the differences as a student. So the name student was a great advantage. The GFC in 2008 was a major push for student investment because everybody was looking for predictable, robust cash flows in a world of great uncertainty. And student had that sort of sense of they move in September, they pay their rent, they move out. There's always that feeling about risk, but there really isn't that much risk. So the GFC brought a lot of institutional investors looking to put money in. So at that point, the whole market moved from small opportunistic investment houses and individuals into the major institutional investors that have come into the market and then increasingly emerged. I mean, Blackstone have just spent £4.7 billion on a student portfolio in the UK. Now, 15 years ago, that would have been beyond anybody's comprehensive. So the institutionalization of it helped CRM because we had built institutional grade reporting and operating platforms. Because when you're reporting into a big institutional fund, they want granular information, granular detail. And we sort of picked that up from our early days residential management, where we looked after Schroders and ING, and they demanded that level of quality of data. And we were already in a position to do that. So that first mover advantage was a great benefit of us, and that was a key milestone as far as I'm concerned. The best thing I ever did, though, was making myself effectively redundant in the business. With some focus from me, I must say, we built a great management team of a finance director, commercial director, operations director, and build a good, strong team, which allowed the business to grow, because there was always this perception that, well, it's just Keith. And therefore, when he's not there, what happens? So it's important that we made the business a standalone business, not an individual-based business. And that was the key milestone that allowed us to significantly grow. So we're currently now best part of 30,000 beds. We look after a number of university accommodations, provide support and advice to some of the big funds as well. So it's those kind of things that allow you to sort of step forward. But the word student was absolutely the best thing I ever put in our name. I mean, the fee change to 9,250 was, again, a major sea change for the market, because perception was that this is going to dissipate the market, but actually it's exactly the opposite. And the student now feels that they are a customer to the university, and therefore their whole attitude to study and behaviour has changed out of all recognition. The statistics I've seen is something like 30 to 40% of students don't even drink anymore. You know, it is that much of a sea change. And there is a fundamental change in attitude and behaviour. I mean, you know, we put a minimum of 100 meg into each bedroom of internet bandwidth because, you know, they're running 3, 4, 5 devices, and it's absolutely critical. So that's a major change from that perspective.
An interesting area is the demand from the customer has gone up, what people try to build and how you input to developments as to what, you know, the spec should be and how people want to live. Because it's fair to say there's been a few people in your market who have got the product wrong, and then there's very little you can do in terms of management to fill it at the right rate. So what are the kind of things that students look for now compared with 10 years ago? Be interesting to
10 years ago, it was a room with a grumpy old man on reception who gave you your key, told you not to be naughty, checked your room and said it was a mess and left you to it, and that was about it. Now you're paying, you know, not a cheap rent, but not an expensive rent either, for a service. So we operate and behave in a very similar way to a hotel, with a reception staff, with people there to help you and make things work for you. We're very much about creating a sense of community and a sense of being and belonging in the building. So before, most of the ground floor, for instance, would have been bedrooms. Now the ground floor is now very trendy, very on-tone, communal space of lots of kinds of different spaces. So there are study rooms, there are communal kitchens and lounges, there are cinema rooms, there are gyms, there are yoga rooms, there are a whole range of things where people can enjoy living there and build relationships and friendships with lots of people.
And I guess that proposition comes quite close to some of the sort of emerging offerings in co-living and you know, the build to rent projects, which are helping to sort of develop what the housing options are for young professionals and people as they move on from university, particularly in sort of big cities like London. I guess, you know, kind of interesting to hear what you see as the future opportunities for CRM in that space, and how big a part of the housing market you think that type of product is going to become.
Our view is that student and co-living, if you want to use that description, it depends what you define as co-living, but we think that is very much merging into just a living space. Co-living is similar to high-end student in that service proposition, that communal space. It will slightly change post-COVID-19 because we're looking at some new designs to provide people with balconies and a little bit more personal space. Mm-hmm. And room sizes, we believe, will start growing post-COVID because more people will spend time at home working rather than get on their train or their bus or their bike to go to the office, wherever that may be in London. So we think that's going to change. We're looking at a number of co-living sites and we're offering management services in that space. We don't see any fundamental difference. The main difference, of course, is in our student world, they move in September and they move out in May, June, July, depending on how long they stay with us. In a co-living environment, there's that constant tenant churn. So the key issue in co-living, as we see it, is how do I reduce that churn? Because that costs the investor money, because every time you need to paint a wall or there's a gap in your lettings. And our view as well is what we don't want to do is get into this. When we get into it, you don't want too much churn in your co-living because there's then pressure to fill the gap. So you backfill it with Airbnb type tenants, and then that completely destroys or at least causes problems in that sense of community, because all of a sudden there are lots of random people turning up for 2 or 3 days and they have a completely different attitude to the building. There are various groups out there, B2B short let businesses now, that will find you these people to backfill into the space. But I think you need to think more fundamentally about your business model of how do I encourage people to stay longer with me.
And it's interesting. So you were first movers really in getting this right in purpose-built student accommodation in the UK. And then one of the opportunities the business had was that the UK, I mean, I suppose crudely, was ahead of the curve compared with the rest of Europe, and that opened some opportunities to grow internationally. I suppose maybe it'd be interesting to hear how that came about. Was that clients saying, can you come and help us with this? Or was it your calling card with your reputation? Or how did those opportunities come to pass? Because it's obviously a key thing that's also happened since the transaction.
It's a mixture of things. There was an increasing perception that the UK market was becoming more mature, and there was less, but the European market really had nothing, and people had started to realise that young people in Europe were starting to be more mobile and not studying in the university where they live, and it was just starting to happen. With ubiquitous Wi-Fi, with mobile devices, with apps and all of that, people can be away from home but still feel close to home, like we're talking to each other now. You can still talk to mum and dad or your parents, your mates, whatever, and you can be thousands of miles apart. So that perception of remoteness was starting to break down. Universities across Europe were looking to recruit more international students, and again, in Europe, more and more people were going to university because it's a route to a longer-term career. So a number of our friends in business were looking, but they couldn't find anybody in Europe who did what we did. So we were, in a sense, we were pushing them to look, but then they dragged us along with, like, can you do this for us? So we're now active in Spain, Portugal, trying to open in Italy at the moment. We're opening in Poland, we're live in Germany, we're just about to go live in Copenhagen. So we're spreading, we're live in Austria. So our tentacles are spreading.
So I mentioned at the start, Keith, in 2018, we worked with you, and you were, when you sold the business to Core Estate, I guess, what drove that decision in terms of you looking to sell and feeling that they were ultimately the right partner to do a deal with?
It was quite well known in the market that I was never building an intergenerational business. I don't believe in them. I don't believe in passing businesses down to children. I think it's just a personal thing. I think they need to make their own way in life and be able to stand on their own 2 feet and not have this sense of expectation. That's just the miserable old man in me, if you might want to think. So I always had that view, and I'd never made that a secret to people. We'd been approached over the years by a number of people, but never sort of had a sense that these were the right kind of people. Because for me, I haven't spent 20 plus years building a business and building connections and building a reputation of a business to then just take the money and run away. I don't have any involvement on a day-to-day basis, because you can't bring a CEO up through the business and then still be on his shoulder and everybody not sure who to talk to. That to me was very wrong. And I made that very clear from the beginning, that Stuart's running this business. Don't talk to me. Stuart and I talk every day, but he's running it. It's his decision. It's his train set. And that to me was a very important part. The reason for Core Estate was it's largely opportunistic, because we'd been approached by a number of people, and I was approached by an advisor to the major shareholder, who said, look, they have a problem, and I've been told you guys are pretty good, and there may be an opportunity to see if we can do something together. The CEO of the business is in Mippin, you're there, would you like to join in for a cup of coffee? And it sort of evolved from there. They had a rapidly growing investment business, but weren't completely vertically integrated, and needed a robust management platform, which was institutional grade for their institutional investors. And it's taken me 20 odd years to get it right-ish. You never get it right. You're always enhancing and improving. But we had a good reputation that we delivered what we said. And they felt it was one of those classic, do I build or do I buy? And they'd made the decision, it's better to buy. We brought a cash flow with us with our contracts already. Yeah. And therefore that made the purchase a little bit more sort of meaningful for them, because there's a profitable business which will pay them back in relatively short order over a few years, the capital costs of buying the business. So it made sense to them. From my perspective, because they're a European business, it allowed us to supercharge our drive into Europe, because we're taking over the whole of their platform, which then gives us a much bigger footprint. So when you're talking to other institutional investors, you can say, well, we already manage 4,000 beds in Germany. We already manage 2,500 beds in Spain and whatever. And so that gave us that ability to supercharge our step into that space. I mean, my strategy has always been for a number of years, and I've said this internally to the business on several times. We've been a British business looking at Europe. My strategy always was to turn us into a European business looking at the UK. And they recognise that management is the key going forward. That's what all the institutional investors look at. That's what all the banks and funders look at now. You can build it, you can design it, but if you don't generate occupancy and you don't generate gross revenue, you haven't got a valuable piece of real estate, because it's all valued off of the income, the yield off the income. So management is absolutely the key determinant of success.
I guess from the perspective of a founder who'd been building that business in one form or another for best part of 2 decades, what would be your advice for someone who is in that position and looking at, right, is a merger or an acquisition of my business the right next stage in terms of completing the journey? What would be your thoughts on that?
I've got no particular experience of merger. I would always have been very nervous of that. I made it very clear that if you want to buy the business, that's fine. There are certain terms and conditionality of that, which by and large they've stuck to. There was always a few bumps in the road, but I'm pretty chilled about that. Sale is always a difficult one because you've got to be able to let go. And I think as an owner manager, being able to let go of what is your baby that you have spent blood and guts and every hour God sends at times to make it work is a very hard thing to do. And I think you need to emotionally get yourself in a place before you even start thinking of selling, of what will that mean, and talk to your family, talk to your wife. And I was quite open with people in the business as well and talk to them about what that might look like, and what that might feel like. Because I think it's important that people understand the conceit of senior management never ceases to amaze me over the years in businesses I've been involved in. And people forget 2 or 3 very simple things. Somebody very junior in your accounts department sees your expenses, so they know where you've been, who you've seen, what you've done. And they all like to gossip. Number 2, they watch your mood and they watch the way your diary. We are all creatures of habit. Then all of a sudden, it changes. They know things are going on. So be open, be upfront as much as you can. I'm not suggesting you should tell everybody everything, but I think you have to sort of let people know the tone of the journey without them getting this crazy surprise at the last minute. So it will be a surprise because you've done it, but it won't be a surprise because they knew you were probably going to do it. And I think that makes the transition from you to the next so much easier because they understand what's going on and there isn't that fear of, well, we're all going to get sacked. They're going to be major redundancies. They're going to rationalise it, all of that kind of stuff. But no, that would be my advice to anybody who was thinking of sort of moving on, letting it go. Be considered and thoughtful what it means to you, so that when your baby goes, you're not going into the office every day. You're not sort of still trying to be the man or the woman you were because it's gone. Try and get yourself a really good number 2 who wants to be number 1.
Yeah. And
help them in that journey.
You know, I know you're still chairman of the business, but you know, there's a whole world out there, and I know how much you like to travel. What is your sort of ambitions now, personally, side of business? What will be the next chapter for you?
The bit that I hadn't really thought through, to be perfectly frank and honest, is I've sort of started traveling quite a lot in the latter stages of my time at CRM for a whole range of reasons. One, age, I wanted to see the world. And B, I wanted to make a very specific statement that the business carries on when I'm not there. So I go off for South America for 8 weeks. Or I go to the Pacific for 6 weeks traveling, where you're almost impossible to get hold of. So it was trying to make those kind of statements that this business has a functionality without the CEO, and it just continues to thrive. But also as well, what I hadn't really thought about was how people would perceive it. And I've had lots of opportunities, some of which I've taken up, where people have approached me and say, well, we'd always have loved you to do something, but we always thought you were conflicted because you were running CRM and you were fully engaged in that, therefore you couldn't help us. But now you're part-time, a couple of days a month with CRM. Would you like to help us with this? Could you join us with that? So I'm non-exec director of another student fund. I've set up with some other guys. We've gone out and raised capital. We're putting together an Italian investment business. We're just about to buy our first 2 buildings. I've raised capital from a UK opportunity fund. So we're looking at some tired old student stock that we're going to try and buy. And I've got another investor who wants me to work with him, with a couple of other partners in another business, bringing together some co-living stock. So all of a sudden, all the things that you couldn't do, you now can do. And they quite like the idea of, somebody with 20 odd years experience in this sort of the student stroke hospitality space. It gives them comfort when they go to their investors in the bank. So it's not some young fly-by-nights who are going to rip you off for fees and all that sort of stuff. These are sensible guys. They're doing it because they want to, not because they have to. Yeah. And that is a very major thing that you sort of forget about. But you don't, once you've sold, you don't have to do anything again. But God, that would be boring.
Well, look, Keith, thank you very much for taking the time. It's been really good.
Pleasure.
Afternoon.